Okay, welcome everybody to our stamp club. And this is being recorded during our Zoom stamp club meeting. And today I'm going to share a very fun pop-up card. This card was initially inspired and shared by Connie Stewart, who is a very well-known Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. And then also by a very good friend of mine who is an amazing artist herself, Belinda. Belinda shared this design with me and I tweaked it a little bit, but I'm going to show you the original and then also the one that I have here. So let's just look at this card really fast and then we're just going to jump in and make it. It's a lot easier to make. This is a pop-up because it literally will pop up when it is taken out of an envelope. It folds down and it folds so that it will go nicely into an A2 sized envelope. So it ends up being 5.5 inches long and 4¼ inches high. But again, when it opens up, it will pop up. And the nice thing about it is it will stand by itself. And it will look really nice on a dresser, a mantle, a table, wherever the recipient may want to display it. It's made out of one sheet of paper, essentially, and then you get to bling it up. So let's make one. Let's not talk about it, let's do it. I am starting with a piece of standard cardstock, which means, as we all know, that this is 11 inches by 8.5. And I am going to cut this to 4¼ by 11. So essentially, I am cutting this in half. I'm going to put the piece of paper in my trimmer so that the 8.5 inch is on the top. And I am cutting this at 4¼ I'm just going to cut it right in half. And this is going to be the base of my card. Now, in order to get this, and I will prove it to you, it starts off as 11 inches long. In order to get it so that it will fold down to 5.5, we have a couple of score lines that we need to put in. And there are only a few, 2 on each side. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my scoring board. And I'm going to put the paper into the scoring board so that the 11-inch side is on the top. And the 2 scores that I'm going to make on either side will be at 1 and 5/8. So 1 and 5/8. And for those of you who like to triple check before you score, like I do, 5/8 is going to be between 1/2 and 3/4. So 1 and 5/8 is going to be your first score line. And give it a really nice impression. You may want to score it just a couple times. I'm using thick, basic white on this particular card. I like it sturdy so that it will stand up. The second score is going to be at 3 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and score there. And again, I'm just giving it a nice little push. So let's just review real quick. The first score line is at 1 and 5/8. The second is at 3 inches. Take your paper, turn it over. So I have the other end. My initial score lines are over on the right. I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side. I'm going to go to 1 and 5/8, score that, and then out at 3 inches and score that. All right, so here's the base of my card. And again, let's just kind of check in and see where we go from here using the example. So we're going to fold the base so that these 2 pieces go into the back. And the way that we're going to do that, I'm just going to turn the card over. I like to fold and burnish with the bump for lack of a better word, showing toward me. So I always fold so that the bump is inside the fold. I'm folding toward the bump. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold at that 3-inch score line. And again, I'm going to give this a really nice burnish. I really want that to fold up. And then I'm going to fold in the opposite direction to get the edge. And I'm going to give that a nice burnish as well. All right, so this is going to give me one of the sides. Let's replicate that on the other. So I just turned it 180. At the 3-inch line, I'm folding into the middle, giving that a nice burnish, and then coming back the other direction. And I'm going to give this a burnish. Believe it or not, your card base is all set. That's the card base. And now you can decorate that however you would like. And I've seen some really, really beautiful cards lately that have been shared on different social media platforms. And they're being called clean and simple. And clean and simple to me means that whatever card color you have in the background, whatever your card base is, you want to see a lot of that color, and the design, the focal point of the actual design that you put on the card isn't overwhelming. It's more of a focal point that draws your eye, but doesn't distract from, in this case, a lot of white space. I tend to be afraid of a lot of white space, and I'm trying to get over that. And that's why I wanted to do a card like this. So how did I do that? And how might you go about decorating a card like this? And there are infinite possibilities, but I'll show you what I did. I took a second piece of the thick, basic white cardstock, and I cut this to just a little bit shorter and just a little bit less wide than the front of the card base. So the dimensions on this are 4 inches high and 4 3/4 inches wide. So this again is 4 inches high and 4 3/4 inches wide. And the reason I did that is when I put this piece on the top of the card, it has a nice little border around the edge. And what I decided to do on that particular piece is I wanted to give it a little texture. So I'm going to run that through my embossing machine, and I'm going to use the Tasteful Textile embossing folder. It just gives it a really, really nice and subtle design. It's not overwhelming. And one of the things I really like about this particular folder is there's no real up or down to the pattern. You know, you don't have to get completely nutty if you happen to put the pattern in and it's not completely straight, and no one will know. So I know watching somebody run an embossing folder through an embossing machine is not the most exciting thing, but I'm going to run this through, and then I will show you the next steps that I took on the card. So I'm just running that through. I'm going to run that back, get a little bit of texture. And then I decided that I wanted to have a little bit more texture on the piece that was embossed. And let me show you a fun little technique that you can use on many different cards that will give you just a little bit more oomph on your embossed pieces. So here we go. Very subtle, very pretty. But what you may notice on the final card is that there are some additional lines that are actually embossed onto this particular piece before I put it on the card. Well, what I did is I just got out my scoring board, and I just flip that piece over. And you're going to see my hand, but essentially what I'm going to do is just put two little embossing lines or score lines, and I'm going to use the 1/8 and the 1/4. And I'm just going to turn it to each side because I want to have those lines on each side of the paper. And you don't have to, you could put them on opposite sides. You could put them on two sides that are top and bottom. You could put them on two sides that butt up against each other if you want. But it's just really subtle, and it will give you a really, really nice, I think, finish, and kind of set off that piece a little bit more. And honestly, you wouldn't even have to do the initial embossing. You can go ahead and put a piece into your scoring board and put some lines on it, and you'll be all set with a very nice piece to put in. So in just a minute, I will be adding that directly to the top of the card. But before I do that, I want to decorate the side panels just a little bit. And if I bring back in the finished card, what I did on these is I used a piece of the Blackberry Beauty Designer Series paper. And these were cut to 4 inches high by 1 3/8 inch wide. So this is 4 inches high, 1 3/8 inch wide. And you may want to consider using Designer Series paper on these flaps. It will give you less of a kind of a bulky card when you fold everything down. I'm going to show you another one that I did where I actually did put some cardstock in on the panel, and it makes it just a little thicker. But I think this Designer Series paper, since there's just so much going on, it just adds a really, really nice touch. So again, the measurements for the pieces that I cut out are 4 inches high and 1 3/8 inch wide. And I'm simply going to attach these to the sides. And I'm not going to do anything fancy at all, other than I'm going to make sure that I know that I have them the right way up. So I know this is going to be the bottom of the card. I'm making sure that since this has a pattern, that I'm paying attention to the pattern before I glue that onto the side, so that that pattern is going to show in the correct orientation when it is put on. And you don't need a whole heck of a lot of glue when you do this. And I'm just going to make sure that I give it a nice little border when I add it in here. This is another piece of the paper that comes in the Blackberry Beauty Designer Series paper collection. And it has a lot of the Blackberry Bliss as one of the accent colors. It is just a gorgeous, gorgeous set of Designer Series paper. And I really, really love it. So again, I'm going to triple check, because I've done this before, where I've accidentally put Designer Series paper wrong side up and not been super happy with the results. So I have my Designer Series paper on the outside, which is going to have just a nice little accent when the person opens that particular card from the envelope. I have my front piece that I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put this right down on the front. And let me, before I do that, if you do this scoring on the side of your paper, you've got a choice. You could attach this piece so that the lines are de-embossed. This is the side that I actually pushed into to do the scoring. Or you could turn it over and show it as embossed, where the score lines are kind of coming toward you. I tend to like it looking embossed, but if you use that technique, you can do whatever you'd like to do. And while I'm gluing this on, let's just talk about, there are other things you can do with this kind of design. You don't need to do tone on tone. You could put a different color cardstock. You could put more designer series paper. You could do really whatever you want on the front of the card and make it your own design. All right, so there I have the front of the card as the backdrop, the canvas for the design that I'm going to do. And now I'm just going to replicate this design that I have on the original. And not a lot of magic involved in this at all. I use a piece of designer series paper, again, from the Blackberry Beauty collection. And I use one of the dies from the Tasteful Labels dies. These are absolutely fun. They've got a lot of really great shapes. And the one that I use for the background designer series paper is the second one on the bottom, this really fun shape. So I cut that piece out. Then I also have a piece of the gold foil. And I, again, went back to the same dies, the Tasteful Labels dies. And I used this double banner. And I cut out a piece of the gold foil. So I have that piece as well. And then I think I was just deciding that I was going to continue to use these dies because they're just so pretty. And I wanted my sentiment to say thank you. There are a lot of things going on right now, just in our collective world, where I think we can take some time to thank those who are in our lives and giving us encouragement. So I picked the thank you from the Elegantly Said stamp set. And I stamped that on a piece of basic white using Blackberry Bliss. Again, this is one of the colors that is in the Blackberry Beauty designer series paper. And then I decided to cut it out with the smaller of the two circles, again, with the Tasteful Label dies. So there were quite a few shapes that I ended up with for the front of this card using the same die set. These are the three that I ended up with for that. I also saved some die cuts that I had made from Forever Fern and some other sort of foliage dies that I hadn't used. These were leftovers. I don't throw die cuts away. Let me show you. I have this little cup that is full of die cuts, and I keep a lot of die cuts in here, and I will use these on projects. I'll just pull them out and see what I have to see if there's something that, frankly, I don't need to cut out. Maybe I already have it. So I have these two little foliage pieces as well. And then the last bit that I used on the front is something a little bit new for me. I've not used this before, and I was really excited to try it. And it's the Expressions in Ink, ephemeral, whatever. This, we're not going to even use it. The Expressions in Ink pack. I'm leaving that word out. And it is so awesome. There are a bunch of pieces that come in this set that are pre-cut, and they are just fun. There are some really cool, like double pieces like this. You also have leaves, and you also get a package of really nice sequins that are very sparkly. And there are several pieces of what I used in this card. So those were the pieces that I used to put it all together. And I just layered things one on top of the other. I started by putting this piece on the bottom. I used a bigger one, but I'll show you. Put this piece on the bottom. Then I put this label next. And I probably will just use these rather than get the larger piece out. I have my foliage that is going to lie on either side. And then I doubled up the sentiment and then attach the sentiment with dimensionals. So just layer that up just like that. And that's what I will end up doing on the front of this card. I am not going to go through and glue this right now because I really want to show you another version. But let me show you what this will end up looking like when it's glued down. And to glue these pieces down, what I suggest is that you use some tweezers and you hold this, turn it over. You'll see that on the back side it's white. So you could even use the white rather than the gold, maybe on a darker color cardstock if you wanted to do that. But if you're holding this with tweezers, just put a little bit of glue on a couple of the places on the piece and then turn your tweezer back to the right side and go ahead and press that down. So that is what I will end up doing with that one. And then I will put my die cut piece right on the top. And I will put the foliage on either side of where the sentiment is going to go. I will double up my sentiment, and that will end up being initially glued together and add it with dimensionals. So that's what the design of this card will look like. And again, I think it is just really, really simple, really clean, really sophisticated. And to finish it off before I put it into an envelope, I will add a few of the brushed metallic adhesive back dots, and they come in 3 gorgeous colors. And on this particular card, I decided that I was going to complement the gold that is in the trim. And I used a couple of the gold pieces. And then you may see a little jewel that is tucked up underneath here. That came from the Elegant Faceted Gems. And it is a pretty kind of a pale pink that goes really nicely with the leaves and the background paper there. Now on this card, what I would end up doing is I probably wouldn't use the pink just because there's not pink in the background paper, but I might use one of the clear or one of the little cloudy pieces on the right, and also come back with a couple of the gems up on the left. So a lot of different ways that you can put a pretty similar design together. And I think it really talks also to the expressions in ink package, because you'll see that by just using 2 of the background pieces, 2 of these double frames, the larger one and then the smaller one. Let me show you what a full piece of this looks like. So this is a full piece that comes from the pack. And on this card, I used the larger of the 2. And on this card, when I put it together, I'll use the smaller of the 2. And obviously, one is horizontal, one is vertical. And you'll see that there are several other pieces that you have in this. Plus, you can use what's left over, punch it, die cut it, use it for other projects. And you'll have quite a few pieces that you can use for that. So this is one way to make this card as the pop-up card. I'm just going to bring the original back in here for a second. So again, this is one that will lay flat for you to put into an envelope and will pop up when the recipient receives it. And it's the size of an A2 card. You can write your sentiment on the back right here. There's plenty of space here. And because this is a white piece of cardstock, it will be very easy to actually put your message right there without any problem. And this is oriented like a landscape card. Well, there's another way to make a pop-up card. And this is the design that was initially shared by Connie Stewart. And this is a portrait pop-up card. So the difference is obvious and the similarity is obvious as well. This again is going to pop up. So it has the two sides, but it is a portrait card. It's also a traditional A2 size card. So this is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And if I bring this back in, you'll see that they are both 5 1/2 inches tall. I turn them so that they're the same orientation, and 4 1/4 inches the other way. But just like we do with A2 cards, we can do them either horizontally or vertically. So there are a lot of different ways that you can make this. So let me show you and tell you how to do this card. And I will be putting some directions in as well as far as the dimensions. This card starts with a card base that is a little different in terms of size. It's not half a sheet. The one that we did initially is half a sheet. This piece starts as 5 1/2 inches high by 9 1/4 inches long. So you're going to be able to get one of these cards out of a piece of regular cardstock. The other card, this one, you'll be able to get 2 card bases out of 1 sheet, since this is half a sheet of paper. So you start again with 5 1/2 by 9 1/4. And then just like the other card that we did, there are going to be 2 score lines on either side. And again, I will make sure that I put these in the directions. The first one is at 1 1/2. The second one is at 2 3/4. So first is at 1 1/2. Second is at 2 3/4. Flip it around. You do 1 1/2 and 2 3/4. And then you have the freedom of design. And when I showed you the other card, I mentioned that I was going to also show you this version. I want to talk to you about just a couple of differences, and I'm going to put these side by side. I want to make sure that as we're looking at these together, we can contrast and compare. So obvious differences. This card has a card base that is basic white. The front of the card is pretty much basic white. This card is made of Calypso coral. And then the front of the card is designer series paper. This is an old package of designer series paper. I apologize, but I thought it worked really well with the elements that are going on here. You're also going to see that I put a border around that designer series paper, so I have a frame. The designer series paper here is 5 1/4 by 3 1/2. And then I added just 1/8 of an inch to either measurement to get that frame. And again, I will put those into the instructions and information. Then on the side, the panels, let's talk about that for a minute. The one on the left, the one that we did initially, is designer series paper. The one here is designer series paper, but underneath it, it has a layer of cardstock. So it's a little bit thicker. And when you make these and you experiment with what you want to do with the panels, you'll see that there's a real difference. And the panels here are, the designer series paper is 5 1/4 by 1 1/4. So 5 1/4, 1 1/4. And then the frame, I did 1/8 of an inch larger in both directions, just to get a frame on the back. The pieces that I put on the front are not Stampin' Up. These are Spellbinders dies. I've been having a lot of fun with some embroidery, and I did all the embroidery on here. But then down at the bottom, I do have some of the Stampin' Up dies, and did a happy anniversary on here. The other difference is the piece that is on the card for the sentiment. So again, on the one that is the white card base or a lighter color card base, if you write your greeting on that, you're not going to have any issues with the person being able to read it. But on this card, on the one that I did with the Calypso Coral, I decided to add an additional piece of basic white. And that one is 5 1/4 by 3 1/2. It is the same measurement as the designer series paper on the front. Just a little bit less tall and less wide than the actual card front itself. So it just gives a nice place for the person to write a message on that. So these are the two different orientations of the same kind of card, the pop-up cards. And again, I will add the measurements for both in the directions. But I just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to have this kind of card available. I think it will be one, I know it's going to be one for me, when I have a quick card that I need to make. It takes no time, as you saw, to cut, score, get your card base together, and then you can bling it up however you want and make it either kind of a shabby chic elegant or a little bit more of a decorative card all around. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I am going to stop the video here. And again, I will add the information to the detail. So thanks a lot, and I hope you make some pop-up cards.